is John Linnebaugh from John Linnebaugh Tutoring, and this is GMAT and ACT, SAT, GRE Sentence Correction Basics. You can find me at johnlinnebaugh.com, and the email for me is john@johnlinnebaugh.com, and the phone number is 415-623-4251. You can also see live group tutoring at collabful.com. Just come, see when I'm scheduled. Costs a little bit of money, but no big deal. It's a good deal. And you saw a little preview there. Here we go. Sentence correction for standardized tests. These are the ground rules. First of all, don't be stupid. What do I mean by that? Well, you will be dealing with sentences that cover different subjects. You may find that you don't understand the vocabulary or otherwise can't tell what, if anything, is wrong. So even then, you should guess rather than leaving answers blank. There is no guessing penalty, which is really a wrong answer penalty on the GMAT. So not guessing would be stupid. Don't be stupid. And also the SAT and ACT, again, no guessing penalty, so just go ahead and guess. And also, you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, John. I know there are no sentence correction questions, kind of like the ones that you're going to do here that are on the GMAT, that are on the SAT and ACT. Yeah, they're not the same exactly, but the SAT and ACT have long versions of these problems, that is, passages rather than individual sentences in the writing and English sections of these tests. And these strategies will help. These will also help for sentence completion, that is, fill in the blanks questions. All right, so let's move on. More ground rules. While it helps to understand something about the topics of the sentences, you will need to read something for content. That means you'll actually have to understand what it's about, not just know the mechanics of the grammar. You will not have to know anything about these topics in advance, so there's no need to panic. And how could you? I mean, they don't tell you what it's going to be about, and it could literally be anything that's written in English. So you're not going to be able to cram and find it out. So don't even try. Just spend the time reviewing grammar so you understand that when you take these tests. It's just know the grammar, know the basics. It'll help you out a lot. The best choice in any of these questions is only the best of the choices. It's not going to be the best possible expression of this idea. So you're asked to pick the best of 5 choices or 4 choices, depending on which test you're taking. That doesn't mean that the right answer will be the best possible, that is, the ideal way to correct the sentence. Sometimes the right answer is very formal, depends on a grammar rule that most people ignore or don't know, or just sounds wrong. The test makers want most people to get these wrong. Why? Because it helps them get that nice normal curve. So, even though somebody's good, you got somebody who's just a little bit better. Anyway, so here's an example. Someone might ask, who are you speaking to? Most people would say that. Grammatically, it's wrong, though. You would have to say, to whom are you speaking? Most people wouldn't say that or even recognize that it's the grammatically correct form of the sentence. Another one you can think of is, imagine somebody knocks on the door. There's no window in the door. You can't see who it is. So you ask, who is it? And then the person would normally answer, it's me, if it's someone who knows you. But if it's someone who knows you and English wasn't their first language, they'd say, it is I. Turns out it is I is actually the correct expression of that in standard American English, even though nobody uses that. I've confused people with that when someone said, hey, is John there? I picked up the phone and said, oh, yeah, well, this is he. And they're like, what? It's me. Oh, okay. So you can make mistakes, or in quotes mistakes, where people don't understand you when you actually use the officially correct English. So you need to learn that to get the best grades on these tests. Okay? Doing sentence correction quickly. The average time you'll have for a sentence correction problem is roughly 1 minute and 20 seconds. Some questions will take more time, others will take less. How do you keep your average time down? It's simple. Just use these rules is what I'm trying to say. 1. If any part of a question, or I should say an answer, if any part of an answer is wrong, the whole answer is wrong. Don't even bother to try to find all the possible mistakes or all the ones that are in there. You just need one. So if something says, hey, we was, that's a grammatical error. You don't even need to look at the rest of that choice. You know that's the wrong choice. So eliminate it. 2. The same error is frequently found in 2 or more choices, so you get a twofer. You get 2 for the price of 1. You might even get 3 for the price of 1. So 3, you want to just find the easiest to find errors and eliminate the easy answers as often as you can. And here's an example of a 2 for the price of 1 and also a least bad answer. So we talk about you're not always going to have a great answer choice that's even the right one. And sometimes you'll get ones where they give you 2 or more answers that are both wrong for the same reason. Here we go. This is an example. It's important to pay attention when studying for tests. Well, if you're looking at it not too closely, say, oh, okay, yeah, that sounds right. It's important to be aware when studying for tests. Well, and you say, well, I don't know. Well, the other one said pay attention, and this says be aware. Those both sound okay. I think pay attention is a little bit better. It's better to remain vigilant when studying for tests. Vigilant, that sounds fancy. Maybe that's the right answer. John was saying that sometimes it's the answer that is formal and doesn't sound right. I'm getting confused. I don't know what to do. And then be very careful when you are choosing answer choices to tests. Well, I don't know. Well, okay, and the answer is it's going to be the last one. Because even though that could be better, and be very careful when you are choosing answer choices to tests, the other ones are all obviously wrong because they're using the wrong form of its. It has to be it''s, which stands for it is. Its with no apostrophe is just the possessive of something that is an it. So that doesn't work. So these first 3 are all wrong. So the fourth one has to be right. Okay, so let's doing sentence correction quickly. So here's point 4. If you've already spent close to 2 minutes on the question, just guess. Move on. Just find an easier question. If you've already eliminated even one answer choice, it's still better than just guessing blindly, so you've given yourself a little bit of an advantage. And if you get it down to 2 choices, that's great. That's 50-50. And since the GMAT is an adaptive computerized test, each correct answer, so every time you get one right, that just makes the test give you a harder question that you're more likely to miss. Manhattan Prep has estimated that most people only get about 60% of the questions right, so don't panic over one question where you had a 50-50 chance of getting it right. Okay? The next thing you want to do is you always want to use your internal, in quotes, ear to eliminate wrong questions. So if you can read, write, and speak English well, you should be able to detect most errors in grammar, usage, idiom, etc. just by hearing it to your ear, either literally by saying the words out loud or figuratively by using your mental ear to hear these words in your head. However, don't talk out loud during the test. You will probably be asked to leave if you do. So it's better to just use your mental ear when you take the test. Clues from the question. If the underline, the part of the sentence that is underlined is very long, there's a good chance that the question deals with sentence structure, parallelism, meaning, or modifiers. If the underline is very short, try comparing the choices before reading the sentence. So maybe you can even just look at it and go, okay, that choice is wrong, and I didn't even have to read the actual question stem. I'm just looking at the choices, and I know that they're grammatically wrong. The first underlined word, or the word right after the underline, can tell you about the issue being tested. For example, if the word was in the first underlined word, then the sentence is probably testing subject, verb, agreement, or verb tense, since was is a verb. Obviously, it has a tense. So obviously, if something's not underlined, it can't be changed, and the choice must agree with it. All right, let's move on. So here's some clues from the question. How to get clues from the question is what I'm talking about here. So what are the differences between the answer choices? If the differences are verb forms, concentrate on number and tense. They had versus they have. So they had this, they have this presently. They had this in the past, they have this now. He has, he has done something or he had done something. So again, the present versus the past, and so on. If all the answers but one seem to differ on only one nitpicky point of grammar or on which common idiom/expression is correct, most likely that's not the problem. You want to choose the answer that's different. The error is in a part common to all the choices, so they're all wrong if they all have the same problem. So Joe has to running. Well, okay. Well, Joe has to running. I know that's wrong. Joe must ran. Okay, again, you can tell that's wrong. Joe should runs. Well, no. It's time for Joe to run. All right, so you can get that one pretty quickly. You say, well, the only one that's even remotely correct is it's time for Joe to run, or it's time for Joe to run. So here we go. We pick that one and move on. As you do each question in practice, first thing you want to do is ask yourself why each of the 4 wrong answers is wrong. What would make you pick the one that's one of the wrong answers? How do you avoid that mistake? That's the second point. 3, what would you do to avoid making the right answer the answer that you chose? In other words, what could you do to screw yourself over by picking the wrong thing? How do you avoid making the mistake that screws you over? And 4, what makes the right answer right other than that the other 4 are wrong? That's always good because it helps you get ahead if you actually know why the right answer is right. If you don't, that's fine. Process of elimination is a perfectly valid way to do it, but it's even better if you actually understand why the right answer is right. Grammar and overview. You will never have to know the names of most technical grammar/writing/language terms, but you will have to recognize them and know how they work. You will also have to know some of the exceptions to the rules. English is particularly annoying that way. There are many irregular verbs, etc. Lots of words have been adopted from foreign languages that don't necessarily go well with the original English language, so we have a lot of just really odd rules and exceptions to rules in English. Now, just to be annoying, let's go over some of the exceptions to the rule that say you won't have to know the names of technical grammar, writing, language, etc. So that is, you will need to know some technical terms. Let's go over those right now. A clause. No, I don't mean Santa Claus, even though it was just Christmas yesterday when I'm recording this on the day after Christmas is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, but no offense to Santa, but we don't mean the Santa Claus. So, a clause is a group of words with a noun and a working verb, as Manhattan Prep likes to put it. So, for example, the rain stopped. So there are 2 kinds of clauses, the dependent weak and the independent strong. I think we definitely should have a strong Santa Claus. We need Santa to get around the world in one night. Ha ha ha. Anyway, but to be serious, the difference between a dependent and an independent clause is that the dependent clause is not itself a complete sentence, but an independent clause is. So for example, a dependent clause would be before the rain stopped. You can tell that's not a complete sentence because you just listen to that in your internal ear and you go, what happened before the rain stopped? Before the rain stopped, you sang a song. Come on, John, don't leave me hanging. Independent clause would be the rain stopped. So your inner ear tells you there should be more to the first one because it's saying something happened before the rain stopped, what happened. But the second one says, well, what happened? Oh, well, the rain stopped. Oh, okay, that's great. Well, let's get on with our day. So we can tell the difference between a dependent is a complete sentence, and independent is a complete sentence. So independent is one that can stand by itself. That's why it's called independent, or it's called strong. And the dependent is the one that you need something else. Oh, I don't know. Before the rain stopped, what? So that would be dependent, and independent would be the rain stopped. Got it? Okay, good. Modifiers. A modifier is anything that describes other words. That is, it provides other information besides the simple noun and verb, that is, the subject and the predicate of a sentence. The rain stopped. Okay, that's a sentence and a predicate, and okay, fine. The is the definite article. So, rain stopped. The cold driving rain stopped. Well, cold and driving are both adjectives that describe the noun rain. So we know that the rain is cold and it's really coming down hard. It's driving at you. Ooh, okay, wow, that sounds nasty. I'm glad I'm not on that. Adjectives are the simplest modifiers. The cold driving rain stopped briefly. Well, briefly is an adverb. Adverbs often end in the words ly, which modifies the verb stopped. Adverbs modify verbs, adjectives, or other adverbs. And of course, they use adverbs a lot when they're naming new internet startups, like they call it Grammarly or whatever, quickly. Well, okay, anyway, you know what I mean. Not trying to make fun of any particular thing, even though those are both actual companies that exist. Modifiers. An essential modifier provides information that is critical or essential to the meaning of the sentence. Think that. A non-essential modifier provides information that is not necessary or essential for the sentence to be meaningful, which. So if you see that, that's important. If you see which, it's like, that's nice, but I don't really need it. How do we know the difference? Well, if you take out the modifier and the sentence doesn't really lose much meaning, then the modifier is non-essential. If the sentence becomes vague and not very meaningful without the modifier is essential. Also, essential modifiers often use the term that, which they're at, that, whereas, use, I'll try that again. Although essential modifiers often use that, whereas non-essential modifiers use which. So again, essential modifiers, it's important, uses that. Non-essential, it uses which, and it's not very important. So Manhattan Prep uses the sentence core to describe any independent clauses in a sentence, along with some essential modifiers. This is the bare minimum needed to have a coherent sentence. And here's the citation to Manhattan Prep where I got it from. Although I usually order the chicken burger, I ordered the noodle salad surprise for lunch today at the cafeteria today. So the core is that I ordered the noodle salad surprise today, not that I normally order the chicken burger. So if you really wanted to get down to it, what'd you have for lunch? I just say, oh, the noodle salad surprise. Oh, okay, that's great. Well, I don't care what you normally do. I just want to know what you did today. So that would be the core.
Conjunction, junction, they won't let me use this without giving me a copyright violation. You get to hear me sing instead. Sorry about that, but there's not much I can do about it. So here we get to go. Hope you enjoyed this little ditty.
Pretty far.
Conjunctions. Conjunctions, as the name implies, join words and phrases. The most important function of a conjunction on the GMAT and most standardized tests is to connect two independent clauses. The conjunction is usually preceded by a comma. So if you have a statement such as, this is a pile of garbage and it stinks, that's a complete sentence. In fact, it's two complete sentences that are joined using a conjunction. So notice that this is and it stinks are both strong clauses. They're complete if somewhat meaningless sentences. I mean, this is a complete sentence, even though this is not particularly useful or meaningful, but it is a complete sentence. It stinks, again, by itself, not particularly meaningful, but it is a complete sentence. Pile of garbage is a noun and a modifier to give the pronouns this and it meaning. We know that this refers to a pile of garbage. So does it. So that helps it out. Conjunctions continued. Conjunctions, well, coordinating conjunctions, I should say, connect two equally important clauses. So the best known coordinating conjunctions are the fanboys: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So, I like to eat food for it tastes good. you should eat food every day, and I think everyone else should too. Something like that. A subordinating conjunction makes one clause a weak or a dependent clause. A subordinate has less power and depends on the other, so it's weak and dependent. Get it? Subordinate conjunctions include, but are not limited to, things like although, before, after, while, though, and unless. So although you have a good point here, generally you are incorrect. So it'd say, yeah, you made one good point in this argument, but really the rest of your argument is not very good. So what's the important part? Your argument is wrong, even though you made a good point. That's less important that you made the one good point. Get it? Okay. Manhattan Prep's markers. I haven't seen this term used outside of Manhattan Prep's GMAT textbook, but it's useful, so here goes. This one is not a grammar term, but it's important. A marker is a clue that a certain grammatical topic is being tested. As you work through this unit, you will learn about other kinds of markers. For example, the word unlike is a comparison marker. Okay, unlike should probably be put in quotes here, but it's not. Anyway, when you see the word unlike, you want to ask yourself what comparison is being made. Let's say you read an explanation and thought, I didn't know what that word was a marker for that topic. Immediately write down that marker. Just write it down, keep a list, make flashcards, record it any way you can or you prefer, but do record that when you see this particular marker, you should think about a particular grammar issue. So, unlike, well, that would mean, this means this is not like something else. So this is an unusual case, there's a contrast here. That's what you would be looking like when you see something like unlike. So just think of them as flaws, not as flaws, as flags that identify sentence correction topics. I guess they could also be flaws because it's a flaw you need to find, so you know how you have to correct the sentence. But let's move on. Return to meaning. Sentences must be logical. If a sentence would... Okay, I'll try that again. If an answer choice would create a sentence that doesn't make sense, eliminate that choice even if the grammar or usage, etc. is perfect. I'm going to say that again. Even if the grammar is flawless, the usage is flawless, etc., if the sentence itself doesn't make sense, that's going to be a wrong answer, almost certainly. They're not going to give you something that doesn't make sense and make that the right answer. They say the sky is metallic gold. Okay, they're not going to give you a metallic gold sentence unless they're telling you it's a sci-fi story or something like that. So example here, as I listed on here, what happened tomorrow? That doesn't make sense. You can't know what happened in the future since it hasn't happened yet. Unless, of course, you're living in a sci-fi fantasy where you can time travel and go back to the past and say, oh yeah, this is what happened yesterday, so pay attention to that when it happens tomorrow, because that's what's going to happen. Ha ha ha. Or you can ask things as in the TV show Travelers on Netflix. Where are you from? Okay, so logical comparisons. I discuss these in my ACT and SAT videos, logical comparisons. Again, if a comparison doesn't make sense when it's read literally, it's wrong. The New England Patriots are better than any other NFL team makes no sense. Well, especially today because the Bills beat them, ha ha ha. But anyway, being serious about it, it makes no sense because they can't be better than any team because they themselves are an NFL team. So the Patriots cannot be better than themselves. Most people would understand that. You meant that the Patriots were just the best of the teams, not that they're better than themselves, but that's not what you literally said or wrote, so it's wrong. A little bit more about the return to meaning even. Sentences must be logical. You can't compare two obviously different things even if you didn't mean to make a literal comparison between the two things. Remember, everybody's brain uses kind of an automatic autocorrect, just like your phone or your word processing program on your computer. So if somebody says something like, my homemade pizza pie is better than Carolyn, well,
My pizza is a baked good. Might be bacon good if there's bacon on it. It's a baked good. And Carolyn is presumably a woman or a girl, so that's a really strange comparison to make. I probably mean that both Carolyn and I make homemade pizza, but mine is better. Sentences also shouldn't be redundant. It is best to be concise and to avoid redundancy when writing essays. That sentence itself is redundant. You could have just said it is best to be concise when writing essays. Words should be in proper order. I am sleepy is better than sleepy am I. Or this is an old joke. I think it was an episode of the Love Boat on in the late 70s, early 80s. Old and rusty, I had to drill out the lock. That's a misplaced modifier. Am I really old and rusty, or is the lock old and rusty? Well, probably the lock is old and rusty, so you would want the word lock to be close to old and rusty, not near me or near I. Okay? Sentence, the basic sentence rule. Noun and working verb. Kaplan, Manhattan Prep, calls the non-gerund form of a verb a working verb. A gerund is the ing form of a verb that lets it be used as a noun. So, for example, that's what the eg means, edginess generis. If I pronounced it wrong, I apologize. Anyway, it just means, for example, skiing is fun. While skiing is a verb, it becomes a noun here because is really the acting verb here. Skiing is a noun that says what is fun. And fun is actually a noun as well. But anyway, here's their example. The cat sitting by the stairs. Wait a minute, what about sitting? Well, sitting looks like a verb. It is, however, not a working verb. A verb that can run a sentence by itself. Here's an example of a working verb. The cat sitting by the stairs watched the mouse. Makes sense, right? The cat sitting by the stairs, you can kind of say, well, what about the cat sitting by the stairs? That doesn't sound complete. That doesn't sound like a complete sentence, and it's not. So notice that sitting in Manhattan Prep sentence is used as an adjective. What cat watched the mouse? Oh, the cat that was sitting by the stairs, not the one that's on my bed. So watch out for gerunds without helping verbs. For example, the cat sitting rather than the cat was sitting. So the cat sitting would not be a complete sentence, but the cat was sitting would be. Make sense? Hope so. Another sentence rule. A sentence is a strong independent clause. I know, I've said it before, it sounds like some really bad self-help hypnosis tape. You are a strong independent clause who doesn't need to smoke. You might remember that old episode of Friends if you're old enough, or if you've watched it on Netflix or wherever you might have seen it. Anyway, but I digress. Remember the slide on clauses and modifiers? Anyway, the difference between a strong and a weak dependent clause is often just a word like because, before, after, which, that lead to modifiers. Because it feels good is not a sentence, it's a modifier. I run because it feels good is a sentence. You ought to be able to tell the difference. A sentence is a complete thought, a dependent clause isn't. If you find yourself asking, what, after reading a clause, it's probably a dependent, non-sentence clause. Not always. Technically, some clauses like I do or I am are sentences, but they don't tell you very much without additional words. I am sleepy. I do like green eggs and ham. Sam, I am. For you Dr. Seuss fans there. Okay. Nouns and verbs must agree in number. The man buys his lunch. That's correct. The man buy his lunch. That's wrong. The men buy their lunch is correct. We all get that. Questions this easy are uncommon on the GMAT, the GMAT. I would say they're so uncommon as to probably just not exist. But what they do is put extra words between the sentence and the verb. For example, Henri, who has lived in many countries, are going to be in your class. Since Henri is the subject, the verb should be the singular is. But somebody who's not paying attention can hear countries are and think, oh yeah, that sounds right, and miss the error. Your internal ear can make mistakes if you're not paying attention. Okay, so let's move on here. The rule of prepositional phrases. Of is a preposition. If you see something like a keg of nails, okay, I'll say that again, a keg of nails, know that the noun is a singular. It's one keg, as we see here in the picture, and of nails is a modifier. It describes what's in it or what makes it up. Perhaps the keg itself is made out of nails. This one isn't. It looks like it's made out of wood with a few steel or whatever metal things around it keeping it sealed together. But anyway, if this is a keg of nails, the nails are on the inside. They're the contents. So we get that. That's a prepositional phrase. You want to look at what's before the of, not what's after the of. You know, it's one keg of nails. It's not several thousand nails. Okay? Modifier versus compound subject. Bob and Doug star in a talk show called Great White North, right? Yeah, good day. Bob, along with Doug, star in a talk show called Great White North. The second sentence is wrong. Why? Because along with Doug is a modifier. So with whom is Bob starring on the show? Oh, Doug. So the sentence should be Bob, along with Doug, stars in a talk show called The Great White North. So again, you'd say, okay, Bob, along with Doug, okay, stars in it, not star in it. See the difference there? Okay, if you don't, take a look at it, read it again, read this again, and you'll understand. I'm going to move on, okay? The basic rule is called take out the trash. When you're doing subject-verb problems, just take out anything between the subject and the verb. It's trash and it's useless. All it can do is cause trouble. A keg of nails are on the porch. Well, okay, so take out anything after the of. That's trash. So you get a keg are on the porch? No, a keg are on the porch. I don't think so. A keg is on the porch. Problems on page 37 in Manhattan GMAT guide that I use there. That's where you can find these things if you need to. Sentence core. While the most important essential part of the core is a noun and a verb, there can be more. There's the that core. I'm happy that you could make it. So the pronoun or noun, verb, adjective, that, the pronoun helping verb, verb. So that helps us link two sentence cores that should be linked. So I am happy, that would be one sentence core. That, you could make it. So I am happy, one sentence core. You could make it, another one. That connects those together so we understand what's going on. That can also help us clarify otherwise confusing sentences. So you could say, I know Joe Rogan is a famous okay. I'll try that again. I know Joe Rogan. I cannot talk today. I apologize. All right. I know Joe Rogan, a famous podcaster and stand-up comic, lives in Texas. Wrong. Why is it wrong? Because it sounds like I'm saying I know Joe Rogan. I've seen him perform a few times. I was at the Comedy Store about, I don't know, maybe about 10 to 20 feet away from him, but I didn't want to bug him, so I didn't ask him for a picture or an autograph. Then later, when I went home and heard his podcast, he said, oh, I always accept requests for pictures and things like that, so I went, don't! And I even had my brand new camera that I just bought that day. It was very sad. But anyway, getting back to this. Okay, so if I say, I know Joe Rogan, a famous podcaster and stand-up comic, lives in Texas, well, that sounds like I'm saying I personally know Joe Rogan. I guarantee you Joe Rogan does not know who I am at all. So, anyway, right on the GMAT would be, you say that. So you would say, I know that Joe Rogan, a famous podcaster and stand-up comic, lives in Texas. because it makes it much clearer that I don't know Joe Rogan personally, but I know these facts about Joe Rogan. So, it clarifies to the reader that I know a fact, not a person. To the reader, I should say, even. See what I did there? I don't know the reader. Ha ha ha. Okay, so let's... Right, connecting two independent clauses. There are a lot of ways to do this. First way is you use a comma followed by the fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. You might notice in this picture that I got in the public domain, or at least with permission to use this, it says comma before the fanboy. Okay, that should say comma, but anyway. Other than spelling it wrong, this is really good. You know, so fanboys, they all have 2 or 3 letters. I sometimes think S on fanboys should be since, but doesn't really matter. You want to use a comma and then a fanboy. There you go, or fanboys. Semicolon. That's another way to do it. You can just put a semicolon between 2 complete sentences, and that makes them into 1 complete sentence, and it's grammatical. You don't want to use a comma by itself. That's called a comma splice. We'll get into that later. You can also look that up on my SAT and ACT grammar videos. Colon. You can use a colon especially where the two, well, really only when the 2 clauses are connected. So only when they're connected and the influence is on the latter, on the last one, the second one. So the first one creates an expectation and the second fulfills that expectation. There are only 3 things you need to succeed in life: a good attitude, a good perceptive mind, and hard work. Something like that. In case you can't tell, I just made that up. Anyway, but the colon could definitely be after the there are only 2 things you need, or sorry, 3 things you need, and then you put the colon there, and then you fill it out with that. Dash. You only need you only need 1 thing to succeed in life. Dash. A good attitude. Something like that. You can not make them into things that connect. You can actually leave them separate. You can say, I like food, period. Food tastes good, period. Okay, so you have 2 independent clauses here. You can say, I like food, comma, for it tastes good. The conjunction doesn't have to be one of the fanboys. Because would work here, or since would work here. I like food, semicolon, it tastes good. Again, that works. I like food, dash, it tastes good. I like food. You could use a colon here, I wouldn't, but I like food, colon, it tastes good. You know, but you might, or you say, one reason I like food, colon, it tastes good. Something like that. The independent clauses should be related. So if you say, I like food, semicolon, tires are round, that really doesn't make any sense. That would not be grammatically correct. That would not be a correct answer on a standardized test. Let's move on. Okay, so if we're connecting 2 independent clauses, you don't want to connect them just by putting them together, where you say, I like food, it tastes good. That's a run-on sentence, and you can tell it when I say it like that. I like food, it tastes good. I like food, it tastes good. That's a run-on. A run-on is 2 strong clauses joined without proper punctuation or a conjunction. So, doesn't have the dash, doesn't have the semicolon, doesn't have a period, not a period, I'm sorry, doesn't have a comma followed by a fanboy's conjunction, and or a period. You could have a period and just capitalize the next one and just turn this into I like food, period, it tastes good, period. A comma splice, where a comma is used instead of a semicolon, as I already told you, is a common form of run-on sentence. It's pretty easy to make a mistake when you see that on a standardized test, because if you're looking at it too quickly, you might say, oh yeah, that's a semicolon. No, it's not. That I call almost more of a visual test than a grammar test. I mean, I wear
reading glasses, so I could see making that mistake. So make sure, if your eyesight isn't great, that you have your reading glasses or whatever you need to see well, so you don't miss stupid things like that. Where you don't miss these questions because you made a stupid mistake, because you just couldn't see the difference between, literally you couldn't see the difference between a semicolon and a comma. So pay attention to the punctuation. A comma and a semicolon can look very similar if you are reading too fast or if you forgot your reading glasses, etc. So make sure you bring those with you to your test. Don't use a semicolon or a fanboys conjunction to join a dependent clause to an independent clause. So you say, yesterday I went walking in the park. Well, you wouldn't put yesterday semicolon I went walking in the park, because yesterday it's just a descriptive word. It's not a complete sentence. Or even before I went to the park semicolon I combed my hair. Well, no, you would just put a comma, because before I went to the park would not be a complete sentence. Therefore, you don't need to use the semicolon, and using it is inappropriate. And the same thing with the conjunction and fanboys thing. Before I went to the park, comma, and I brushed my hair wouldn't make very much sense either. So, and don't even think about using those methods to join two dependent clauses. So here we have some examples. While Tom waited outside and I got money from the bank. Does that even sound or look right? No. While Tom waited outside, you could say, comma, I got money from the bank. It's a dependent clause and the rest is an independent clause. So all you have to do is put a comma there. While Tom waited outside, semicolon, the cat sitting on the shelf by the picture window. Notice now we have two dependent clauses linked by a semicolon. Again, it doesn't make sense. It still doesn't work. If you can't tell by reading it, please contact me. I'll try to help you understand it. But anyway, let's move on. Semicolons can also be used as what I like to call metacommas. When you're already using commas, then you bring in the semicolons to work as kind of higher level commas, separating these clauses that already use commas. So what do I mean? Simple. Let's say you need to make a list of things that already have commas in their names. Cities and states in the US spring first to my mind. So you could say, I plan to visit Las Vegas, Nevada. Okay, so Las Vegas, comma, Nevada, semicolon, New York, New York, because that's a city and state, and we want to separate these two together. And then semicolon and Atlanta, comma, Georgia next year. The semicolons are used to separate the list items since they are different from the commas. Otherwise, it might be hard to tell where one item stops and another starts. All right, so we can look at problem set on pages 41 through 42. This is in Manhattan Prep, GMAT, all the verbal, the definitive guide, blah, blah, blah. You can read that there if you want to find it. I use the Kindle edition, and if you want to find that, great. If you want to go buy a paper version, that's great too. All right. So the problem set is quoted as directly as possible. For problems 1 through 4, we will highlight. Manhattan Prep asks you to draw a box in their instructions. It's hard for me to do that here. So the verb and underline the subjects. Then determine whether the subjects agree in number and with the verb. If there's a mistake, rewrite the sentence to correct the mistake. If the sentence is correct as is, mark it with the word correct. So Jack, along with some of his closest friends, is sharing a limo to the prom. So, is that correct? All right, so Jack is the sentence, and this along with his closest friends, that's garbage. We want to get rid of that. So, yeah, so Jack is sharing a
limo to the prom, even though you might think, oh, it's he and his closest friend, so they are sharing. No, it's Jack is just the subject here. Everything else, that's just descriptive. That's parenthetical. It's trash. Take it out. All right, so let's look at the second one. After all the gardening we did, comma, the sun shining on the flower beds make a beautiful sight. So let's try that again. After all the gardening we did, the sun shining on the flower beds make a beautiful sight. Okay, so we see the same problem here. What makes a beautiful sight? Well, it would be the sun shining, right? Not the flower beds. So it should be the sun shining made a beautiful sight. So not make a beautiful sight. And sure enough, that's what the problem is. It should be the sun is the subject, and it's going to be the present tense, so it has to be, or not the present tense, I'm sorry, it's the past tense of sun, so it would be the sun made. The flower beds, well, the flower beds would have also made, but anyway, the subject is sun, not the flower beds. And this is the wrong tense, because make would be the present tense, and we need the past tense. Numbers 1 through 4. All right, so we're going through this some more. The decision to place the beautiful artifacts in out-of-the-way nooks around the mansion's various rooms was inspiring. Okay, so what's the subject here? Well, I would say it's the decision. I mean, decision to is a preposition, so all of this stuff here, from to all the way to rooms, that's a prepositional phrase. So it's the decision was inspiring. All the rest of it's trash. We take it out. Let's see if I'm right. All right, the decision, yep, to place blah, blah, blah was inspiring. So there you go. If you have any questions, please ask me when we talk about this. You can always contact me. I'm always happy to talk to you about this.
All right, number 4. A national supermarket chain and a locally owned bakery, which has won awards for its croissants, has seen a significant decrease in revenues since the biggest employer in the area shut down. Well, we have two things. We have a national supermarket chain and a locally owned bakery. Obviously not the same thing, so they must be two different things. This who has won awards or which has won awards, that's trash. You can take that out. So you'd say, okay, the chain and the bakery has, oh no, they have. So sure enough, we can go a national supermarket chain and a locally owned bakery, which has won awards for its croissants, have seen a significant increase in revenues, blah, blah, blah. So we know the answer has to be they have seen, not they has, because it's two things, not one. All right, let's move on. Okay, now we're going to look at problems 5 through 7. They're multiple choice with only one correct answer. And just as on the real GMAT, answer A repeats the original sentence. And here, though, they're only having two answer choices. You have to see, is the original right or is the only other answer right? Number 5, we have the sports governing body recently revamped the rules about hits to a head, a change intended to increase player safety. Ever since then, okay, well I can see right now, ever since then, that should really be a semicolon. You know, ever since then, players have somewhat paradoxically suffered from more concussions. So I'm going to say no, but let's look at B. Ever since the sports governing body revamped the rules about hits to the head, a change intended to increase player safety. Okay, players have somewhat paradoxically suffered more concussions. Okay, so blah blah blah. And so, all right, there's no there's really, okay, it's just not right. A is basically a sports governing body recently revamped the rules about hits to the head. Okay, boom. That right up to head, that is a complete sentence. That is an independent clause. A change intended to increase player safety. Ever since then, players have somewhat paradoxically suffered from more concussions. All right, so right here where it goes, ever since then, players have somewhat paradoxically suffered from more concussions. That's also a complete sentence. So the way that they are doing this, okay, this punctuation, it's not right. So it has to be B. Sure enough, okay, it is B. So we look at it and, okay, it's a run-on sentence. You need a semicolon between safety and ever, and not a comma. It's also called a comma splice. So we know that A is wrong. B, ever since the sports governing body revamped its rules about hitting to the head, or about hits to the head, sorry. So ever since the sports governing body revamped the rules about hits to the head, a change intended to increase player safety, and we can see here in red it's an introductory weak subordinate clause, not a sentence, and then we have an adverbially phrase also, and a positive descriptive trash that can be taken out. Anyway, those are fine, because then you just, the only thing that's really a strong clause is players have somewhat paradoxically suffered more concussions. That's a complete sentence. That's a strong clause. So that works. And so we see here players have somewhat paradoxically suffered from concussions. That's the main root sentence. Okay, technically players have suffered would be the real root, and somewhat paradoxically is more trash. It's an adverbial phrase that you can take out, and more concussions is the object and an adjective. Anyway, you can figure it out as soon as you see that A is a run-on sentence. Basically the okay, the punctuation isn't correct. You just look at it. Once you know what's wrong, you can just take a quick look at the next one, and boom, you know that's got to be the right answer. Unfortunately, on the real GMAT, there are more than 2 choices, but here we can pretty quickly see which one is the right one. Number 6, disappointed by the narrow loss after a long and grueling campaign, Governor Schuster, with counsel from her family, is considering whether to run for governor again next election. So, all right, well, we know Governor Schuster, she's going to be governor by herself. Her family is not going to be the governor with her. They don't get to be the co-governors. So that looks right to me. It says Governor Schuster is considering. That makes sense. And then the next one, B, it says narrow loss, long grueling, blah, blah. Governor Schuster and her family are. Well, okay. Again, Governor Schuster and her family are not, they're not all running for governor. She's going to be the one who is going to be governor. They might be helping her, but they're not going to become the governor, not going to run for governor. They're just going to help her run for governor, so B cannot possibly be right. And here we go. So basically that's what it says here. I mean, A is correct, B is wrong for the reason that I just told you. If you have trouble with that, you can just pause this and look at it, or you can actually look at the Kindle version of this book, or just go get a copy of the book. Or you can ask me and I'll try to explain it. Okay, let's move. Problem 7. The lighthouse down by the bay overlooks both a vast stretch of coastline and a number of fisheries that are owned by the local government. So either that's correct the way it is, or you would replace the
the part starting with vast stretch of coastline with a number of fisheries that are owned by the local government and a vast stretch of coastline. So the only difference here is really the order in which they put the fisheries and the vast stretch of coastline. So the question is do we think that the government owns both the coastline and the fisheries, or it just owns the fisheries? Most likely just the fisheries. So let's check that. So, okay, A, so it says, yeah, the vast stretch of coastline being first is wrong because it's ambiguous. It looks like the coastline and the fisheries could both be owned by the government, whereas in the second one, it's a number of fisheries owned by the local government and also a vast stretch of coastline. So, oh, I get it. So the government owns the fisheries but not the coastline. Now, they could own both, but they probably should put it, owns both a number of fisheries and a vast stretch of coastline would make that much clearer. So let's move on. All right, problems 8 through 12. We're going to identify the errors and try to write a correct sentence. Since there are many ways to correct a sentence, you don't have to fix a sentence without examining your options and the answer choices when you take the real GMAT. So what we mean by that is you can only correct these sentences in the ways that they let you, since they give you the answers you can choose from. So you should look at those. But here we're just going to work on our own, and that gives you more practice and you'll get more flexible at it. So the music company was afraid of the accelerating decline of sales of compact discs. Okay, I'll try that again. The music company was afraid of the accelerating decline of sale of compact discs would not be compensated by increased internet revenue. Well, okay, that's kind of a mess. So it'd be something, well, the music company was afraid that the accelerating decline of compact disc sales, I would probably just say, would not be compensated for by, or I could say was afraid that, you could say the music company was afraid that increased internet revenue would not compensate for the accelerating decline in compact disc sales, or the accelerating decline of sales of compact discs. So let's see what they choose. All right, so the music company was afraid of the accelerating decline of sales of compact discs would not be compensated by, by increased internet revenue. That's great. The verb compensated has no subject, which is true. It wouldn't, the decline can't be the subject because it's in a prepositional phrase, the decline of the, so that's not going to be a subject. And there's no conjunction to make a compound verb, so you don't have the music company was afraid of the accelerating decline of the sales of discs and that it would not be compensated for by increased internet revenue. So the easiest solution that I came up with was the music company was afraid that the accelerating decline of sales of compact discs would not be compensated by increased internet revenue. So the pattern there is there's a subject, the music company was afraid, so that's the verb, that the accelerating decline of compact discs, that's, would not be compensated, so you have another subject, so that's the accelerating decline of compact discs. That's a compound subject, would not be compensated, so compensated is the verb, and then by increased internet revenue, that's other parts of speech. Okay, so that's the subject verb that subject verb thing that you will see in the GMAT when you do these things. Question 9. The petroleum distillates were so viscous that I'll try that again. The petroleum distillates were so viscous the engineers had to heat the pipe by nearly 30 degrees. All right, don't worry if you don't know what the word viscous means. We'll discuss it in just a second. Okay, so here's our answer. The petroleum distillates were so viscous so that the engineers had to heat the pipe by nearly 30 degrees. By the way, viscous means sticky, so oil can get sticky when it's cold. That's why they use lightweight oil if they know they're going to be using it in a really cold environment like Siberia or Alaska or something like that. So, the pattern is subject verb, subject verb. So the problem is you can't link two independent clauses, that is a subject and a verb, with a comma. That's a comma splice. So either you have to use a semicolon or a that. So we see in this first one, they didn't do that. They used a regular comma. So if they had used a semicolon, maybe that would work. The petroleum distillates were so viscous, semicolon, the engineers had to heat the pipe by nearly 30 degrees. That would work. Still be a pretty clunky sentence, but it would work. It would be grammatical. So most people would say something like what they wrote there. They'd say, the petroleum distillates were so viscous that the engineers had to heat the pipe by nearly 30 degrees. That's the way you would do it if you're doing it correctly, but the way that a lot of people would do it that's not correct is the way that they do it in this question, which is what they're hoping on, that people just say, yeah, people say that all the time, must be right. The petroleum distillates were so viscous, comma, the engineers had to heat the pipes by nearly 30 degrees. So, it's like, basically, you're so stupid, comma, you must have to find your own back end with both hands and a map. Well, again, that wouldn't be correct. You'd have to say, well, you're so stupid, comma, you must need to find your rear end with two hands and a map. That would not be correct, but it would be correct if you said, you're so stupid that you probably need to find your own butt with both hands and a map. Anyway, hope that helps. Let's move on. 10. The municipality's Back to Work program has had notable success. Nevertheless, it is not suitable for a statewide rollout for several reasons. Okay, I can see right here there's a problem in that the municipality's Back to Work program has had noticeable success. Well, that's by itself a complete sentence. It's an independent clause. Nevertheless, it is not suitable for a statewide rollout for several reasons. That's also an independent clause. That means these have to be linked with either a semicolon or a dash or maybe even a colon. I wouldn't use a colon, but maybe you could get away with that. I wouldn't do that. But anyway, so all right, we know immediately that this cannot be right. So we're going to move and take a look at it. I would probably just make it two separate sentences, or I would just use a semicolon and be done with it. That's probably what they would want you to do, is use a semicolon, and sure enough, that's what we have here. Is the municipality's Back to Work program has had notable success, semicolon, nevertheless, it is not suitable for a statewide rollout for several reasons. Nevertheless is not a conjunction, so you can't use that. You have to basically you have to do that with nevertheless or however. You have to use a semicolon and then put after nevertheless or however, you have to put a comma. So here we go. The municipality's Back to Work program has had noticeable success, yet it is not suitable for a statewide rollout for several reasons. So that's where you're using a comma with one of the fanboys conjunctions. Yet would be good, or you could even use but, you know, something that shows that there's a contrast. Yeah, it's great, but it's not quite ready for prime time, so to speak. All right, let's move on. Number 11. Historically, the Isle of Man had an economy based primarily on agriculture and fishing, semicolon. Now one based on banking, tourism, and film production. Okay, so you'd want to say now it has an economy based on banking, tourism, and film production. But can we do it this other way? All right, so as it is, it's wrong. The simplest way to fix it would just be to spell everything out, as I just said. Historically, the Isle of Man had an economy based primarily on agriculture and fishing. Now, comma, it has one based on banking, tourism, and film production. You can use what they were trying to do there, what they're trying to make it look like, is an elliptical construction, where basically you can connect two parallel strong clauses and omit or elide the parallel parts in the second and later connected clauses. So if you're taking them out, you can do that. The reason it doesn't work here is because had is not the proper tense for what's happening now. So we have now one based on banking. Okay, So you'd have to, you know, because it says it had this before, it's not going to be, if it's parallel, you have to be putting in the same ones where you'd say, not, you know, then it had this. But no, you're saying now it has this. So basically it would be, instead of had an economy, it's going to have to be now it has an economy. So that doesn't work. Basically, by the time you're done, including everything that's different, you'll get the correct answer above that we've already said here. So I hope that helps. Okay, let's move on. The Bentley Trench, situated more than 1.5 miles below sea level and completely covered in Atlantic glaciers, and it is the lowest point on the planet not under the oceans. All right, you can tell just from listening to that it's wrong. It'd have to be, you take out the and it is, so, you know, completely covered by Atlantic oceans. You just put is the lowest point on the planet under the oceans. I'm sure that's all you have to do. And yeah, that's all you have to do is take that out. The part in commas is a trash adjectival phrase you could also take out. So you can just say, if you take out this whole thing, you go, the Bentley Trench, and it is the lowest. Okay, we know that's not right. The Bentley Trench is the lowest point on the planet, not under the oceans. There you go. So we've got that going for us. Modifiers revisited. Adjectives and adverbs. Adjectives always modify nouns. Adverbs can modify verbs, adjectives, or other adverbs. So as we can hear in this song by Rush, the Necromancer,
I can't use this without giving all the ad money to the record company, so you get to listen to this instead. Sorry about that.
That explains how Bytor slays his foe. We see that he stealthily, which is an adverb, modifies the verb attacking. And both are parts of an adverbial phrase, 2 words or more that modify a verb, adverb, or adjective. In this case, it explains how Bytor slays his foe. Okay. All right, the case of only. The placement of the word only can make a difference. Let's take a look at I only like pizza from Papa Giovanni's. Only like as opposed to love. Everybody does that, but that's probably not what you meant. You probably meant, no. The only kind of pizza I really like is the kind that I get at Papa Giovanni's. Let's look at another sentence. I like only pizza from Papa Giovanni's, but not anything else from Papa Giovanni's. So, you know, oh, they have a special on calzones and they have wonderful pizza. No. I just want the pizza. So that's what that would mean. or at least it's most likely what it would mean if you're looking at it very closely. The only pizza I like is from Papa Giovanni's. Ah, so this would be basically closest to what everybody thinks all of these things mean, is the only pizza that I want to eat is the pizza that I can get at Papa Giovanni's. Ah, I see. So you like Papa Giovanni's pizza, not Popular Pie pizza down the street. Most people would auto-correct these in their brain to make the meaning any of these. The only pizza you like is the kind they make at Papa Giovanni's. But it's something you want to look out for when you are correcting these sentences. So here's an example from Manhattan Prep. The GMAT will sometimes offer answers that use an adjective or an adverb is required or vice versa. Consider the following example. Max's great-grandmother, from whom he inherited his curly hair, is his supposed Irish ancestor. Then in the second one, it's Max's great-grandfather, from whom he inherited his curly hair, is his supposedly Irish ancestor. So in the first one, where we're using an adjective, supposed, then supposed points to the noun ancestor. So, okay, supposed ancestor, so that means, well, maybe Max's great-grandmother isn't really his ancestor. Maybe one of his ancestors down the line was actually adopted by Max's great-grandmother, so, not really an ancestor, but, hey, they raised her as such, and, everybody called her the great-grandmother, so, Anyway, but getting back to this, let's look at the next one. Okay, this next one is the same thing, except it uses supposedly rather than supposed. Well, supposedly ends in ly, so that should be a huge clue that this is an adverb. So if it's an adverb, it's got to point to something that is not a noun. So can't point to ancestor because that's a noun. So Irish. Okay, well, Irish is an adjective, so supposedly Irish. So that means, well, maybe great-grandma was Irish. Maybe she wasn't. We don't know. She looks suspiciously Italian or something like that. So that would be, you'd be implying that Max's great-grandmother might not actually be Irish. She immigrated to Ireland from some other country a long time ago, and she really didn't want to tell people about it, So, we can see if you use an adjective where you should be using an adverb or vice versa, that can very seriously change the meaning, or at least the connotation, the implication of what something is. So it's important to make sure that you use an adjective where you mean an adjective, or an adverb where you need an adverb. So obviously here, the second sentence, the one using supposedly, is the one that we're talking about, that his great-grandmother might not have been Irish, not that she wasn't really his ancestor. I don't know. That's what they say, that it's obvious. I'm not completely sure it's obvious. It could be something else. It's, he was adopted, their son was adopted, and they didn't want him to feel bad, so they just said, oh, yeah, oh, that's your mom, yeah. Okay, anyway, let's move on. Modifiers versus core. For most problems, such as subject-verb agreement, you can just strip away the modifiers. However, you can't always do that. Manhattan Prep example here. So, imagine that a friend is giving you directions to her house. What's the difference between these two sets of examples? Or sets of directions, I should say. Alright, turn left on Mayberry Street. Okay, so presumably you know what direction on Mayberry Street. Then you're going to turn left and stop at the first house, which is red. Okay, so what they're really telling you is, hey, once you are oriented correctly and you make a left turn, the first house you see is where you should stop. And, oh yeah, it's red. So, in case you get confused some way, if it's not red, then you know you went the wrong way. Okay, but it's not that important. It should be the first house. I assume you can count to 1. The second one says, so turn left on Mayberry Street again, okay, and stop at the first house that is red. Okay, so obviously that's telling you keep going until you see a red house. The first one you see, stop, that's the house. Obviously that's a completely different meaning than the first one. So you notice here that
The first one uses which, and it uses a comma before it. That tells you that that's not essential information. You can strip it out, and it shouldn't make any difference. And you just, the first one you look at it, turn left at the house on turn left on Mayberry Street and stop at the first house. You don't even have to know necessarily that it's red, but it's just something they might put there. Maybe it's an unusual red, whatever. He told you that, but he didn't have to. And the second one, the first house, that is red. If you take that out, if you turn left on Mayberry Street and stop at the first house, wow, you're going to have a real problem, because what if the first house is purple or green or something, and knock on the door and they'll be, oh, you're at the wrong house. Who is this idiot who keeps giving people directions that they don't even know that it's the red house? Da-da-da. Okay, and also, as we said, non-essential information is usually separated by commas, but essential information isn't. Let's move on. Ba-ba-da. All right, so here's how to eliminate wrong modifier answers. If the answer choice would be illogical, just take it out. If the answer choice would be ambiguous, that is a squinting modifier, for example, take it out. Squinting modifiers are usually adverbs and usually have one clause in front and another behind, both which could possibly be modified by the same adverb, and so you end up with things like this. Jumping up and down quickly entertained him. And I got that from this website here, Writing Explained, blah, blah, blah. So, does he mean that the kid, presumably, whatever the man who was doing this, he liked to jump up and down very quickly and that entertained him, or he jumped up and down but not particularly fast or particularly quickly, but it entertained him just like that, boom. So what does he mean? We don't know. Notice that the sentence also starts with a gerund, you know, the ing form of something as well. So, and remember, as I said before, you should read these sentences for their meaning, actually pay attention to what they mean, and if the answer choice would be illogical, even if other than that it's perfectly great, it's perfect punctuation, perfect, you know, mechanics, everything like that, it's still not going to be the right answer if it doesn't make sense. Okay? Markers for modifiers. How to tell what is what. Markers for modifier types. Okay. As we said before, if you have a comma followed by which, that's adverbial, which means it's non-essential. It's just descriptive. No comma and that's a noun modifier. Wow, it's essential. So basically it's just adjectival. Okay, adjectival, that means it's describing something that is a noun that's important in the sentence, so it's essential. How does this help? So if you see the answer split between that and which modifiers, you want to ask yourself again, is this essential information? Do I lose something important or just some commentary, you know, opinion, etc. if I take it out? So here's an example that I came up with. The bullet that hit the politician was a .45. Okay, that's pretty important information. Wow, sounds like somebody's been assassinated or at least wounded seriously. So if you change that to the bullet was a .45, wow, that loses a lot of information. Okay, that's nice. Was it a special bullet that somebody put in their wallet or, you know, put in their pocket, or, you know, they shot at target practice? No. Politician was shot with it. Oh, geez. So then you can say the bullet was painted red, which was a little odd. That's not too important. Might be an important clue, might be a political message or something. I don't know, but anyway, it's not too important. The bullet was painted red basically has the same meaning. It's just the reader has to ask himself or herself, is this something people normally do? You know, might be some symbolism there. How about the bullet that hit the politician was painted red? Well, okay, that's interesting. So, excuse me, let's move on. Prepositional phrases, gerunds, and past tense. Oh my. Prepositional phrases and gerunds and past tense. Oh my. All right. Modifiers, you can find this on page 52, 53 of the
book that I'm using by Manhattan Prep. Manhattan Prep calls these prep phrases ing words and ed words. So ing words, what are normally called gerunds, if there's no comma before the ing, it's a noun modifier, not a non-modifier. It does modify something. It modifies a noun. So it's adjectival. All right, so that means it's important. The man running the store was obviously very old and tired. Okay, that's important because running here, it's not saying what he's doing. Well, it's saying that he's operating the store. So, but it tells you who it is. Is it the man who was buying some kiwi fruit? No. It's the man who's running the store. Oh, okay. If there's a comma before or after the ing phrase, it's adverbial. Means it modifies anything but a noun, and it's not as important. So, running out of the store, the man screamed, "Holy cow, the house is on fire," or the store is on fire, I should say. How was he screaming? Well, he was doing it while he was running out of the door. So, that's kind of important, but it doesn't identify who the man was. It just says, okay, there was a man who ran out the door screaming, "Holy cow, the store's on fire." Let's move on. Past tense, mostly going to be things ending in ed. We know that in English, most words, the past tense of those verbs do end in ed. So modifiers that are in the past tense, that is ed, roughly work the same way. The trainee recruited last week has arrived on the bus. Okay, so that's kind of important. Well, what trainee has arrived on the bus? Oh, the one who was recruited last week. Recruited modifies trainee, which is a noun, so we know it's important. Another example, the house built last week was sold yesterday. Again, that helps you identify which house it is. Well, which one? Oh, it's the one that was just built last week. Oh, wow, great. Great new house, and they sold just like that. That's amazing. And a commaless ed mods are always noun mods for our purposes. So they're always going to be adjectives. Built modifies the noun house. Notice that there's no comma in either. So we can look at a different one. Recruited last week, comma, the trainee excitedly reported for training. Well, okay, that's a little bit of description that you have a trainee who's very excited, and oh, well, he's excited because, hey, he was just recruited last week. Built last week, the house was sold for a high price. Okay, so that has something to do with it, but it's not quite as important. It doesn't identify it. It just says, well, this is a house that was sold for a high price, and oh yeah, it was built last week. So notice there are commas in the past tense verbs recruited and built, that they still modify the same nouns, but also the verbs, and they're less necessary, if you can see what I mean. Okay. Which versus ing modifiers. When you have a modifier with a comma and a which, you have a noun modifier, that is an adjectival clause. It's a clause that acts like an adjective. When you have an ing modifier, you have a verb, etc. modifier, basically anything but a noun modifier, and that's an adverbial clause. If you confuse these, you can end up with sentences like these. The wheat crop yield was low this year, which led to an increase in wheat flour prices. So while people say this all day long, I probably say it all the time. Basically, it's wrong in a technical sense. So technically it's wrong, which is still wrong on a test. So what you want to do is, not do this, because the reason you don't want to do it is the noun modifier which makes it sound like this year led to a flour price increase. Okay, we know this year didn't cause the increase. So how do we do it correctly? I'm glad you asked. When you have an ing modifier, you have a verb, etc. modifier, adverbial clause. So when you use this in basically the same sentence, you say, the wheat crop yield was low this year, leading to an increase in wheat flour prices. All right, so the leading, that makes this whole thing an adverbial clause. So then you say, oh, okay, so the wheat crop yield was low. All right, so that modifies the was, it was being low. So then you say, oh, okay, they're saying that the low wheat crop yield led to an increase. That makes a lot more sense. You could also rewrite the whole sentence as, this year's low wheat crop yield has caused an increase in wheat flour prices, eliminating the whole which versus ing problem. And the takeaway, if the answers are split between comma followed by a which and an ing, if the modified word is a noun, use which. If the modifier refers to a verb or an action, such as the wheat crop yield being low, then you want to use comma and ing, or you just want to use ing. You probably want to use comma and ing as opposed to comma and which. All right, move on. You also want to watch for misplaced modifiers. This is a classic. I use this as an example all the time. Everybody uses an example all the time of a misplaced modifier. Groucho Marx, one time in Africa, I shot an elephant in my pajama. How it got into my pajamas, I'll never know. Ha 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 ha. See, because everybody already corrected that in their head, and they just said, oh, I shot an elephant in my pajamas. Well, obviously he means he was dressed up in his pajamas. And most people don't even do that consciously, so you're like, yeah, okay, he was in his pajamas and he shot an elephant. That's great. But then the second part says, no, 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 that's not what I said. Some of you might think I made a grammatical mistake, but I did not. The elephant was in my pajamas. Ha 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 ha. So I've seen other examples that were kind of like this. Here's one. After removing their skins, the children ate the carrots. Ew, didn't that hurt? Were they on drugs? I mean, I remember hearing that when I was a little boy from people. That was a story about LSD. That, yeah, there was a girl and she was tripping on acid and she thought she was an orange and she peeled off all her skin. Heard that when I was like, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 7 or something like that. Probably like 7. I don't think it was 5. But anyway, doesn't really matter. Excuse me, I have to cough here. All right, anyway. So, you mean, when you look at that, you say, oh, you mean the kids ate their carrots after removing their skin. All right. So, basically, to avoid this problem, simply place the modifier and the noun as close together as possible. So that way, okay, put carrots near removing their skin so you don't have somebody else or something else removing its skin. Opening modifiers should be right next to the main subject near them. So if you have something like a short and simple book, John had no problem reading The Social Network. Is John a short and simple book? Probably not. So a short and simple book, The Social Network was easy for John to read. Makes more sense that way, right? Right. Multiple noun modifiers. Some nouns have to be modified with more than one phrase. So here we have the keg of flat beer, which had been on the frat house's porch for a week, needed to be returned to the liquor store. This is correct. Compare it to the keg, which had been on the frat house's porch for a week, of flat beer needed to be returned to the liquor store. Which one sounds better to you? Probably the first one, because, keg really needs to be modified by of flat beer. If you put it on the porch, it sounds like it's a porch of a week of flat beer. That sounds like some weird hazing thing, like, ha ha ha, we're gonna make you drink nasty flat beer. Ha ha ha, not fleet beer, that'd be if you're in the Navy. Ha ha ha. Anyway, let's move on. Some nouns have to be modified with more than one phrase. The keg of flat beer, which had been on the frat house's porch for a week, needed to be returned to the liquor store. This is correct. Again, we're comparing it to the keg, which had been on the frat house's porch for a week, of flat beer needed to be returned to the liquor store. The latter one, the second one, is obviously not as good. It's confusing. It makes it sound like the liquor store wanted the flat beer back, or the week was of flat beer in some way. So, remember, essential modifiers take precedence over non-essential mods, and comma followed by which modifier, that's always non-essential, so it should go last. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Multiple noun modifiers. So which of the following options is better? Okay, we have this first sentence. Jim biked along an old dirt road to get to his house, which cut through the woods. All right, that makes sense. He biked through an old dirt road to get to his house, which cut through the woods. Ah, well, actually, that doesn't make much sense. Did his house cut through the woods? Huh. All right, to get to his house, Jim biked along an old dirt road, which cut through the wood. Oh, that makes more sense. The road cut through the woods, not the house. I'm thinking it's some funky rocket-propelled house that can cut right through the road. Okay, obviously not. But see, when I looked at it the first time without even really looking at it very closely, I was like, oh yeah, I get what it means. Your brain will autocorrect things like that because your brain wants things to make sense. So it's pretty good at absorbing mental and grammatical shocks and saying, oh, okay, my autocorrecting, shock-absorbing brain will fix this and it'll make sense. So here you want to try to think literally, think like a computer, think like somebody who's messing with you, saying, no, sir, there is no bathroom in this shopping mall. Oh, you mean the lavatory. Well, yes, or you mean the toilets. Yes, the toilets are over here. Okay, let's move on. Which of the following is better? Jim biked along an old dirt road to get to his house, which cut along the woods. Or to get to his house, Jim biked along an old dirt road, which cut through the woods. So again, we have the problem here is the first one, it sounds like the house is cutting through the woods, which doesn't make sense. So having an old dirt road cutting through the wood, we know that makes sense, that they're saying, okay, the road has a path that goes through there. So to get to his house is much more important than cut through the woods, and a comma followed by which modifies noun, so it modifies house instead of road. So the first sentence makes it sound like the house cut through the woods, which it's not American idiom, and it sounds like the house is built on a bulldozer plowing through the woods. All right, let's move on. The takeaway. You want to select the choices that put the nouns closest to their modifiers. Noun modifiers such as comma, which should always be as close as possible to the nouns they modify. Since these tests are multiple choice, this is easy. You just pick the one with the answer with the noun closest to its modifier unless there's an obvious reason not to do it. It literally doesn't make sense. There's some obvious, well, not even obvious, just some grammatical error that you recognize is there. Fine. Don't pick it, but if neither of those is there, then just always pick the answer where the noun is closest to its modifier. All right. Possessive nouns. You're my noun, but I want you to be me. I love you. I'm your noun. No, okay, not that kind of possessive noun. Anyway, according to Manhattan Prep, possessive nouns are technically adjectives, not nouns. Okay, so here's the citation to that. So does this sound right to you? Having been awarded many gold medals in the Summer Olympics for swimming, Michael Phelps' pride was great. Okay, so do you see a problem there? There is a problem here, I promise. And once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it. Okay, is this talking about Michael Phelps? Well, technically no. It's talking about Michael Phelps's pride. Having trouble pronouncing a name that isn't that hard. Sorry about that. Anyway, so I was like, well, no. His pride was not awarded any gold medals. Michael Phelps himself was awarded these medals. Okay. So, possessive nouns continued. Having been awarded many gold medals in the Summer Olympics for swimming, Michael Phelps's pride was great. No, because it sounds like Michael Phelps's pride, not Michael Phelps himself, was awarded the gold medals, as I just said. We could rewrite this as, having been awarded 3 gold medals in the Summer Olympics for swimming, Michael felt great pride. All right, let's move on, buds. Markers for noun modifiers. Relative pronouns. Which, who, whose, whom. These are all markers for noun modifiers. That is sometimes a noun modifier marker, but can also be part of a subject verb. Then that subject verb structure, sentence structure. So something like Bob was happy. Okay, so subject is Bob, noun is was, happy is an adjective. That, and then we have the subject is Mary, had is a verb, gotten engaged to Phil. Okay, so there we go. Who and whom always refer to people. Which never refers to people. The busboy which bussed our table is wrong. The car which was blocking our driveway is right. Whose can modify either people or things. The company whose headquarters were in the buildings that are now in Google's offices. I actually have a friend who used to work in Google's offices. Before they were Google's offices, he worked at the company that had those headquarters before Google had them. It's true, that's why I use this. Anyway, let's move on. Markers for noun modifiers. The words which or whom sometimes follow prepositions. The canal through which water flows. The senator for whom we worked. A lot of people think these structures, through which, for whom, sound off. You know, they sound a little weird because they are a little weird. People generally don't use them, you know. You say, who are you talking to, not to whom are you talking. Things like that, or through which the water flows. So, they'll hear that, say, nobody talks like that, you can't fool me, that's got to be a wrong answer, and they will mistakenly cross off a correct answer. When you see this preposition which or preposition whom structure, you want, so preposition which or preposition whom, check to see if it's correct by inverting the text to create a complete sentence. So, the canal through which water flows. Okay, invert it. Flip it around. Water flows through the canal. Makes perfect sense. And the noun and verb inside the prepositional phrase, water flows, becomes the subject and the verb of the inverted sentence. Then use the preposition through and finish up with the noun which started the original phrase, the canal. Notice that the marker which is dropped off from the inverted sentence. If the inverted sentence is valid, then the original structure was also correct. So if it works after you have inverted it, then it worked fine before you did that, and you know that it's correct. The original structure is correct. Where and when. These can be noun modifiers. For example, when, where describes the place. So, excuse me. When where describes a place as the place where something is located or happening. So where should not be used to describe a metaphorical situation. We had an agreement where I drove and he maintained the truck and we both unloaded and unloaded the truck. That's wrong. Use in which rather than where. Yes, everybody uses where in that situation, but it's wrong in GMAT and other standardized test lands, so just go with it. When modifies a time. You can use it, you can use during which instead of when if you'd like to. Go ahead and do it. So, you can think of the song Quest by Fire by Iron Maiden. I know, Iron Maiden, excellent! But anyway,
In a time when dinosaurs walked the earth, and land was swamp and caves were home, da da da. Okay. So, that's a song, and it talks about in a time when dinosaurs walked the earth, and the land was swamp and caves were home. So, you had within a time. You could say when. All right. Adverbial modifiers, Manhattan Prep example. Adverbial modifiers answer questions about how much, when, where, why. Adverbial modifiers don't have to be as close to the verbs as they modify. So it's not like when you were working with an adjective, it has to be right there. Adverbial modifiers can be a little bit away from it and it still makes sense. So Amar filled in his timesheet in order to make the payroll deadline rapidly. Did he fill in his timesheet rapidly? Did he do it really quickly? Or did he make the deadline rapidly? Deadline is in 10 minutes, dude. You better get it done. Okay, we don't know. The modifier is closer to the latter option, so that would be that he needed to make the deadline rapidly, which makes more sense. I mean, well, doesn't make sense actually, because you could say you either make a deadline or you don't. So anyway, although perhaps you could say Amar's timesheet somehow set the deadline for other people, so your timesheets are due within 24 hours of when Amar's completed, then, well, all right, well, then you might put some pressure on Amar. I need you to get yours done because I need to pay something next week. All right, so here are some ways to fix the sentence the right way. Amar filled in his timesheet rapidly in order to make the payroll deadline. Another way, Amar rapidly filled in his timesheet to make the payroll deadline. All right, so that's from Manhattan Prep, and here's a little Dilbert comic. So, okay, here's my timesheet, including guesses for the next 2 days so I can meet your arbitrary clerical deadline. If anything important comes up, I'll ignore it to preserve the integrity of the time reporting system. Are you finished annoying me yet? According to your timesheet, I'll be here for another 14 minutes. Ha 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 ha. Okay. So, modifier markers, prepositions. Prepositions can mark adjectival noun modifiers or adverbial modifiers. In GMAT problems, prepositions are usually in noun modifiers. The president of the bank was arrested for embezzlement. Of the bank modifies the president. So, what president was it? Was it Joe Biden? No, it wasn't the president of the United States. But it was Joe Schmo of First City Trust Bank. Watch, it'll turn out there really is a guy named Joe Schmo who works at a bank called First City Trust Bank, in which case, I just made this up, I didn't know, I'm sorry, Mr. Schmo. Anyway, prepositional phrases that modify nouns almost always follow the nouns that they modify. So, it would be the president of the bank. Okay, president is the noun. Of the bank modifies president, so we know what kind of president you're talking about. All right, more modifier markers, prepositions. So this is adapted from Manhattan Prep. Test questions often ask whether a particular preposition is the right one to match other words in the sentence. For example, you can say the criminal is capable of violence, but you cannot say the criminal is capable for violence. Why? That's just idiom. It's just the way you do it. Like an idiot, it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. It's not very, not very smart, but that's the way people chose it, so that's the way people do it. So, these idioms, that you're saying capable of rather than capable for, you just have to memorize them. The best way to do it is probably just read a lot, practice, listen to what people have to say, and then you'll get those things right. You can have two prep phrases or prepositional phrases in a row. So Manhattan Prep likes to say, for example, the board of directors had a vigorous debate about the efficacy efficacy of the new strategy. I may need to work on the efficacy of my pronunciation of the word efficacy as well as pronunciation. Boy, that's weird when you can't pronounce pronunciation. Anyway, so you can see, all right, debate about, there's one prep phrase, efficacy of, there's another one. More about prepositions. Okay, so here's an example. In the article, the reporter told the story of the recent school's graduations. Sorry, not graduates. In the article, the reporter told the story of the recent high school graduates' accomplishments. You want to compare that with the reporter told the story of the recent high school graduates' accomplishments in the article. Which one is better? Well, let's find out. Here's an example. So in the article, the reporter told the story of the recent high school graduates' accomplishments. This one is better because it makes sense. So if you're saying, oh, look, Ned Nautical's career was featured in an article in the small town newspaper. How nice. The second one would say the reporter told of the recent high school graduates' accomplishments in the article. Ned accomplished something in this article? You mean he wrote it? Even then, how great could that be? It's just a news article. All right, most people would understand this means Ned's accomplishments were covered in the article. You know, it was other accomplishments, not the fact that he was in the article itself, or even if he wrote the article. But this could confuse people, or at least open you up to people asking stupid jokes, you know? Like when you say, oh, you know, my high school where I attend, there's always going to get the one person who says, oh, it's your high school? You own it? Ha ha ha. That's why I like to say, the high school that I attended, so I don't have to say, oh, ha ha ha. Boy, that's the first time I've ever heard that joke. Anyway, see the difference? Of course you do. More prepositional modifiers, markers. Prepositional modifier markers. All right. The mean girls wear pink on Tuesdays. On Tuesdays modifies wear pink. So it's an adverbial modifier. Okay, here we go. M-prep. Okay, Manhattan prep. Multiple noun modifiers example. So, the following examples, etc., are directly quoted from Manhattan prep. The following sentence contains multiple noun modifiers. See how many you can spot. All right. Researchers, well, that's a noun, discovered that the most common risk factor resulting in cholera epidemics is the lack of a clean water supply. All right. So, well, researchers discovered, okay, that's a noun, that's a verb, that the most common okay, well, common modifies a noun, so, you know, risk factor, okay, resulting in cholera, is a lack of a clean water supply. Okay, well, clean, so I see clean and common right here, all right. So what do they get? Okay, the adjective comma describes the risk factor. Yay, got it right. And so the adverb most refers to common, so it's an adverbial modifier. What about the complex noun modifiers? All right, researchers discovered that the most common risk factor resulting in cholera epidemics is the lack of a clean water supply. Well, okay, a prepositional phrase of a clean water supply modifies the noun lack. Ah, see, that's tricky. Lack is a noun. It's being used as a noun there, and of a clean water supply. Ah, it's an of, so that turns that whole thing into an adjective. Ooh. So, the word resulting in an ing word and the word in a preposition, when you see this, go with the first word first, the ing word. This word is not preceded by a comma, so
resulting in cholera epidemics signifies a noun modifier. It refers to the risk factor. Okay, so, wow, that's kind of complex. So anyway, so we have resulting in cholera epidemics. So okay, here we go with that. It refers to the risk factor. More modifier markers. Modifier markers. Modifier markers that end with ing or ed words. When an ing, that is a gerund modifier, is not set off by a comma, it's a noun modifier, which means it's an adjective or it's an adjectival phrase. As we've just seen in the Manhattan Prep cholera example just now, when it's set off by a comma, it's an adverbial, that is, it modifies verbs, adjectives, other adverbs, anything that's not a noun modifier. A noun modifier might be something like this. The auto insurance company recorded the incident as, in quotes, an accident causing death or bodily injury. So notice it's causing, but there's no comma, so it's a noun modifier. Adverbial modifier might be something like this. Careless driving led to the accident, comma, causing death or bodily injury. So we can see the second one, it's adverbial. It modifies this whole thing, careless driving led to the accident, so that would be something that kind of modifies the whole thing. They don't have to be really close to each other, so that's a nice way to do it if you need to modify something that has a lot of words in it. Otherwise, you want to say the incident in the noun modifier. You say, well, okay, the incident, that's a noun, and what kind of incident was it? Well, it was an incident that was an accident causing death or bodily injury. Or you could say, what kind of accident was it? It was an accident causing death or bodily injury. And actually, the second one would be more correct. It would just be, well, it's an incident. What kind of incident was it? Well, it was an accident. Okay, what kind of accident was it? Well, it was an accident causing death or bodily injury. So that's really what you want to get out of that. Okay, let's move on. More modifier markers. Ing words. Okay, gerunds again. Present participles always take the form of a present tense to the verb to be, followed by an ing word, also known as the gerund. So, I'm flying, said Wendy to Peter Pan. I'm flying, woohoo, I'm flying. Okay, so Peter Pan, they say that a lot in that play and movie and things like that. I'm flying, da-da-da, so they're all flying. Okay, so notice it's not I was flying, I will be flying, it's I'm flying. So they always take the present tense of the verb to be followed by an ing. So I'm flying, I'm doing this, I'm dying, I'm highing, okay, highing isn't a word, I'm crying. All right, there we go. More modifier markers, even more. Gerunds can be verbs, nouns, adjectives, that is, noun modifiers, or parts of adverbial modifiers. So any ing word that's not a verb and is set off by a comma is part of an adverbial clause. That is, the whole part of the set off by the comma is an adverbial phrase. So again, we can go back to Bytor. Stealthily attacking, Bytor slays his foe, not his flow. All right. Anyway, stealthily is obviously an adverb. We're doing, ends with an ly. How is something happening while attacking? Okay, that's a verb. Well, okay, or it's a gerund. So anyway, so how is he attacking? He's attacking stealthily. And
arrogantly twisting the sterile canvas snoot of a fully charged icing anointment utensil, he puts forth a quarter ounce of a green rosette near the summit of a dense but radiant muffin of his own design. So that's Frank Zappa. How is the rosette being pooted? It's being pooted arrogantly. Ah, I see. So, one exception to the adverbial clause rule is a comma followed by including. So you can say something, I like fruit including grapes, apples, and oranges. The comma followed by including modifies fruit, which makes it a noun modifier, that is, an adjective. All right, let's move on. Edwards. Haha, not my name, not Edward. Haha, it's my middle name, but anyway. Edward, so past tense. Past tense of a verb, I fried an egg. Adjective, I ate the fried egg. Adverbial clause, feeling fried from a grueling day at work, Pam collapsed on her bed. An introductory ing or ed adverbial clause must refer to the main subject of the sentence. In the example immediately above, Pam is the subject who's fried. It must also make sense in the context of the rest of the sentence. The example wouldn't work if it said, feeling fried from a grueling day at work, Pam was 5 feet tall. Being tired or fried has nothing to do with the person's height, right? Okay, let's move on. Subordinators. I am the subordinator. No, okay, it's not that. The subordinator. These are modifiers that subordinate a clause. That is, it makes something less important. While being clean is important, you shouldn't spend so much time in the shower that you're late for work. These are different from opening or introductory mods because the opening mods have no verb and are thus not clauses. Here's the example expressed using an opening mod. While important, showering should not take so much time that you're late for work. So here you go, that's an opening mod. And a subordinate clause can talk about a different but related subject. For example, being clean versus showering. A modifier must refer to the same subject as the core sentence. So here we go. Subordinators. These are words that should cause you to check if a phrase is a subordinate clause. I'll try that again. Okay, subordinates. These are words that should cause you to check if a phrase is a subordinate clause after, although, because, before, even though, if, since, so, that, unless, until, when, while. So, you want to check these things to see, well, what do they mean? You know, after what? Although, well, what? Because, so you're going to have to look at this and say, like, well, all right, what other phrase am I looking at? How do these relate to each other? You also want to watch out for illogical meanings. Illogical meanings, yeah, I've had a few of those, but anyway. Logical meanings, you can have a contrast word shouldn't be used if the two clauses don't contrast, and a continuation word shouldn't be used if the two clauses do contrast. So if you said something like, even though the bricks were heavy, Bob was tired after carrying them up the stairs, well, they don't contrast. Yeah, they were heavy, so Bob was tired after carrying them up the steps. That makes sense. You wouldn't say even though, because that sounds like, well, even though the bricks were light, Bob was tired after carrying them up the steps. Well, maybe Bob isn't in great shape. Maybe Bob was already tired from doing something else, and this just didn't help. So that would fix that problem. Bob was tired after laying bricks all day, so he ran for a 3-mile run. Again, those ideas aren't consistent, so wouldn't work there, right? Okay, let's move on. Noun, verb, that, noun, verb. We've already discussed that you can't attach a dependent clause to another dependent clause and get a sentence. So, for example, this is not a sentence. I am concerned about injuries such as chronic traumatic encephalopathy. I'm not sure I can pronounce this. Encephalopathy. Anyway, whatever that word is, incurred in football and other violent sports may literally cripple a significant portion of our future workforce. The problem is may literally cripple the verb phrase of the has no subject. What appears to be the subject, injuries, is a prepositional phrase and cannot be the subject of this sentence. So the easiest way to fix this is to change about to the subordinator that. So I am concerned that injuries such as chronic traumatic encephalopathy, ooh, I said it, encephalopathy. All right, anyway, encephalopathy incurred in football and other violent contact sports may literally cripple a significant portion of our workforce. Okay, really wordy sentence, but it does make a sentence. It does make sense. So we'll say, oh, okay, I'm concerned that, not that I'm concerned about. That doesn't make sense. I'm concerned about that, these, that, okay, you just take out here, in the first one again, you just take out the trash. So I am concerned about injuries incurred in football and violent sports. Okay, that would make sense, but then they add may literally cripple. Okay, that doesn't make sense there. You'd have to say I'm concerned that they would do it, because you could just have it be I'm concerned that about injuries incurred in football and other violent contact sports and just end it there, put a period, make that a complete thing. You can even put in this whole thing, I'm concerned about injuries such as, we'll just call it CTE, such as CTE incurred in football and other violent sports. That makes sense. But I'm concerned about may critical. That doesn't make sense. I'm concerned about injuries. No, you can say I'm concerned that injuries might cause it. That makes sense. So sometimes you really want to take out things that are in commas and see if these clauses that you leave in make sense when you put them together. If they don't, you have a problem. Another way to fix this, so you can say the original, I am concerned about injuries such as CTE incurred in football and other violent contact sports may literally cripple a significant portion of our future workforce. You can change that to I am concerned about injuries such as CTE incurred in football and other violent sports, injuries that may literally cripple a significant portion of our future workforce. You could even take out the second injury after sports. You could just say, I'm concerned about violent sports. That may, so the sports, you don't have to have injuries, just say that CTE and injuries can, Okay, you could have, I'm concerned about injuries, then you could take out the whole injury thing. That may literally cripple a significant portion of our future workforce. So even if you take out the second injury after sports, that still makes sense. This is acceptable written English, even though practically no one talks this way. This is something that you write when you're writing a paper, whether it's for school, probably college, or if you're a politician writing a speech, or you're a doctor writing something for an advocacy group because you want the law to be changed or something like that, or you want football to be made illegal or something like that. Anyway, people write about that in writing, or if they're making fancy speeches or writing newspaper articles or something, or journal articles or scientific articles, not generally in everyday written English. But let's move on. Grammar by the numbers. Number 1, amount versus number. So you're going to want to know whether something is countable or non-countable. So the amount of apple juice in the juice box is 300 milliliters. Notice that apple juice is not something you can count without a measurement, some sort of frame of reference. How much apple juice is in that box? Oh, it's 300 milliliters. You can't say, well, I just put an apple juice in that box. That's how many. It's got apple juice in it. That doesn't make any sense. Also note, well, now that we've noticed that, whereas the number of beer bottles in a case of beer is 24, not 12, as some people think. So you say, oh, okay, I know exactly how much, well, you can say, well, okay, how much beer is in a beer bottle? Well, I mean, 12 ounces or 355 milliliters. That's how much is in there. So that's something you can count. You can count beer bottles. That's pretty easy. They're countable, distinct items. For unit nouns, you want to use the uncountable words. I need a pound of sugar. If I just said, oh, okay, I need a pound of sugar to make a pound cake, that's why it's called a pound cake. That makes sense. If I said, I need a sugar to make a sugar cake, you'd say, a sugar? Well, how much sugar do you need for your sugar cake? It's not worth driving to Discount Co. to buy gas unless you're going to buy 10 gallons or less. The idea is that these are bulk items that can't be counted without units again. So you wouldn't say 10 gallons or, well, you could say 10 gallons or fewer, I guess, if you were doing them as distinct gallons, but you probably wouldn't. It'd be easier to just say, okay, if you're not going to buy 10 gallons or less, just go to this, go to the Quickie Mart, buy your gas there. It's not worth it. You're just going to be spending more money just by burning off gas, by driving the extra distance to Discount Co. You want to say or write less than $20 unless you literally mean fewer than 10 individual dollar bills. And notice that I misplaced this comma here. Sorry, not comma, quotation mark. Quotation mark should be after right, as right before less than $20. So sorry about any confusion I may have caused with that. Just pretend that I put that there. All right. Abstract ideas are obviously not countable. A great amount of patience, not I have so much patience, I have 10 patiences. Okay, that doesn't even make sense. Less or fewer, we've all seen at grocery stores, 10 items or less. That sign should say 10 items or fewer, and actually I've seen it at Safeway and Vons and Andronicos and stuff like that. They actually do use 10 items or fewer. Less is for things you can't count. I have less patience than I used to for people who don't understand this distinction. Ha ha ha. You can also look at least versus fewest. I also do have a separate video on diction, which I'll try to hook up here as something you can link to or you can click to. Grammar among the numbers, or by the numbers, I should say. I was looking at the Among the Living album cover here. Anyway, so comparing or referencing two things versus three things or more things. So between refers to two things, just between you and me. Among, as in this song, I'm the man with the power among the living, follow me or die. Okay, hopefully that's more than two people if they're among the living. Although I don't know about this guy telling me to follow him or die. But anyway, comparative versus superlative. All right, so irregular things, you might have good, better, best. So good is good, better than good is better. And the best thing is best. Ha 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 ha. So we know one thing, good, it's a little good. Better, it's more good. And then the most good would be the best. Regular would just be you go old, older, oldest. So we know that something that describes something, all right, it's old. Well, is it as old as this thing? No, it's actually older. Okay, so you're comparing two things. Then finally, the superlative, oh no, this thing is the oldest. You won't believe how old it is. I mean, scientists found this. They'd never seen anything this old. All right, so let's move on. 3, the word number should not be modified with greater, right, sorry, it should be modified with greater, not more. So again, let's do that again. The word number should be modified with greater, not with more. This is a little confusing. Here's an example to clarify it. The number of bills in the cash register today is greater than the number yesterday. All right, so stating that the number was more could be confusing, because what if somebody thinks you mean the value is more? Maybe, but maybe not. So one $500 bill would be worth more than 499 $1 bills, even though 499 $1 bills would be, a greater number of bills than one bill, even though that denomination is $500. Does that make sense? So you should always say the number is greater, not more than something. It's something that you can count. All right. Number 4, you want to increase and decrease versus greater and less. So how do we compare those? All right, think about advertising. Our stock price is now 10% greater. Well, greater than what? The cost of a latte? 10% greater than $1? 10% greater than $10 million? If they don't tell you, it's a meaningless comparison. So it's better to say our stock price increased by 10% since last week, although you still have the problem. Okay, well, what was the price last week? Candy costs 10% less. Again, than what? Than a Mercedes? I don't know. Try candy prices have decreased by 10% since last month. So also, if you don't have a frame of reference as to versus how much, when did it happen, it doesn't mean very much. Also, you want to watch for redundancy. The price of a Ford Mustang increased by 15%. You don't need to include increase with rose by 15%. Same goes for fell by a 15% decrease. You can just use one or the other, that it fell by 15% or it had a 15% decrease, or it increased by 15% or had a 15% increase. Make sense? Okay. Problem set, page 66 on the Manhattan Prep, or in the Manhattan Prep, I should say, in the Manhattan Prep GMAT guide that I use here, which is the definitive guide to the verbal section of the GMAT. All right. So it's page 66, 67. Anyway, so problems 1 through 6 contain one or more underlined modifiers. For each of these modifiers, 1, identify the word or words, if any, that it modifies and indicate if the modifier is correct. If the modifier is incorrect, suggest one way to correct the error. So, a recent formed militia. Okay, please tell me that you know this should be recently. Consisting of lightly armed peasants. Well, that makes sense. Lightly modifies armed, which is an adjective, so that works as an adverb, which lightly is. Yay! And a few retired army officers. Okay. Army officers are a noun. Retired is, well, here it's an adjective, so that works. Is fighting a bitterly civil? No, it's a bitter civil war. Bitterly civil, I don't know, what would that be like? Please pass the potatoes. Fine, I'll pass the potatoes. I don't know, that doesn't even make sense. So, okay, so we can see that recent and bitterly are both wrong. Let's check that. Okay, for sure. All right. So, recently, yes, we got that. Lightly, that's fine. Retired is fine. And bitterly improperly modified civil war should be bitter. Yay! All right, number 2, Angola, which was ravaged by civil war for many years after it gained independence from Portugal, which is now one of... Okay, now this is a mess. I mean, the second... Are they saying that Portugal is one of Africa's successes? Okay, it can't be because it's Portugal. That's not even in Africa. It's not too far away, but it's not in Africa. So, okay. So definitely we're going to have to say Angola, now one of Africa's success stories, was previously ravaged by civil war, or was ravaged by civil war for many years after it gained independence from Portugal. Okay, Okay, so I'd have to say something like parliamentary elections are to be held later this week. Okay, this is a mess. So I'd probably say something like Angola, one of Africa's success stories, is scheduled to have parliamentary elections later this week. And, say, where would you put the, okay, you could say Angola, previously Angola, which was ravaged by civil war for many years after, is today, is now, we'll just say, is now one of Africa's success stories with an economy that grew by 21% last year and is scheduled to have parliamentary elections later this week. Wow. So let's take a look at how we do it here. Okay. So we have several adjectival phrases that all modify Angola. So it looks like, as I said, that Africa's modifies Portugal, which is nonsensical. Portugal is in Europe. Similar, which is one of Africa's success stories, appears to be the subject of, has an economy that grew, but a which modifiers noun can't be a subject. So, so where parliamentary appears to modify last year. So where modifies places, not times. Okay, so, oh, I see. Yes. Okay, so it would have to be, instead of where, have to be in which. So you can do something like that. And what I did before is said, okay, previously ravaged by civil war, but now one of Africa's success stories with an economy that grew by 21% last year. Angola will have parliamentary elections next week. So you can see that one, you just had to really take it apart and completely rewrite the whole thing. Luckily for you, if you get something that's this bad, they will give you answer choices, so hopefully you'll just be able to say, okay, can I find one that makes sense? And that should be the right answer here. So, wow. I hope you don't have one that hard, but if you do, that's how you would solve it, is say, okay, which one makes sense? Just use your ear and then get rid of the ones that don't make sense, and then just pick the one that makes sense. That's really how I would do that. Mary buys cookies made with sugar-free, an artificial sweetener which tastes as sweet as the corn syrup that her brother loves, but having fewer calories than in an equivalent amount of corn syrup. Wow. Okay, this one is also bad. So if we go, we can say, all right, uses sugar-free. All right. So sugar-free is an artificial sweetener which tastes as sweet as the corn syrup that her brother loves, but okay. So she buys cookies made with sugar-free, which is an artificial sweetener. Okay. So sugar-free is what's being modified here, and which tastes as sweet as the corn syrup that her brother loves. So it tastes as sweet as whatever, as corn syrup, but has, so we know that has to be changed. So, all right, an artificial sweetener which tastes as sweet as the corn syrup, that makes sense, and having fewer calories, all modifies sugar-free, makes perfect sense. That her brother loves, okay, we know that modifies the corn syrup. Her brother likes the corn syrup. The only wrong part is having fewer calories than an equivalent amount of corn syrup. That can be changed to which has a fewer has fewer calories than an equivalent amount of corn syrup. Okay, that's easy enough to do. So the final sentence would be, Mary buys cookies made with sugar-free and artificial sweetener, which tastes as sweet as the corn syrup that her brother loves, but... And you could either put in, you know, but which has, or you could just say but has and take out the which, you know, just leave it out, has fewer calories than an equivalent amount of corn syrup. You can leave out the which that's in brackets there. That's why I put it in brackets. So again, this one's kind of hard to do, but you can, you can do it when you're doing this exercise for Manhattan Prep. You can, just write it and take a few minutes to figure it out, and you'll get it together. And the good thing, again, is when you take the GMAT, they give you the answer choices, so you should be able to find the one that makes sense. Something that doesn't use this but having, because it would have to be but has. So that would be your first clue here. Okay. Anyway, and let's move on. People that are cannot be people that. It has to be people who are. So we're going to change that to people who are well informed. Know that Bordeaux is a French region whose most famous export is the wine which bears the name. Okay, you can actually use whose for this French region. Although I was watching 60 Minutes last night, and actually because of global warming and climate change, I know they're the same thing, but anyway, it may be that the French regions are not going to be so great for wine, but England may actually become the new wine powerhouse. That's kind of crazy, huh? All right, let's check this out. So, people who are well informed that Bordeaux is a French region whose most famous export is the wine that bears its name, that is Bordeaux. Well, okay, that are well informed modifies people, so therefore it has to be who are. And then, okay, whose, unlike whom, and whom can modify nouns that aren't human beings. So either people who are well informed know that, or you could say well informed people know that Bordeaux is a famous region whose most famous export is the wine that bears its name. And again, we have that. It's in brackets. You can include it. You don't have to. Either way is fine. Unaccustomed to the rigors of college life, James's grades dropped. Okay, well, what's this? Okay. So, what dropped? Well, James's grades. Well, okay. Were James's grades unaccustomed? Oh, no. It was James was, so you'd have to say unaccustomed to the rigors of college life. James suffered lowered grades. James earned lower grades, something like that. James achieved lower grades. So, you need to be, James would be the one who is unaccustomed to the rigors of college life, not his grades. So then the subject needs to be James, not his grades. Okay, so could also be James's grades, so could be James S apostrophe S. Some would just make it James S apostrophe and leave off the following S. Different style manuals vary. In any event, that's not going to be the only problem here. Here the problem is you have to recognize that James was unaccustomed to the rigors of college life and thus suffered lower grades. So you could say James's grades dropped because he was unaccustomed to the rigors of college life. That's fine, because he obviously refers to James, not his grades. Or because James was unaccustomed to the rigors of college life, his grade dropped, or his grades dropped. Okay, let's move on. All right. Page 7 in the Manhattan Prep GMAT. The air conditioner broke in the middle of a heat wave which caused great consternation. Well, okay, did the heat wave cause great consternation? I don't know. I'd say to the consternation of the people. So, okay, the air conditioner broke in the middle of a heat wave. That's fine. But the heat wave didn't really cause the consternation. The air conditioner's breaking did. So an adverbial modifier, not a comma followed by which would be an adjectival modifier, is appropriate here. So you'd have to have that. So the air conditioner broke in the middle of a heat wave, causing great consternation. So there you go. You can use that. Use the comma followed by the gerund rather than rather than the which of course is extra information rather than important information. And that makes sense because it's adverbial, so this kind of modifies the whole, the air conditioner broke, but it doesn't have to be right next to it, or the air conditioner broke in the middle of a heat wave. That makes sense. Okay. United, we bargain. Divided, we beg. So, what we have here is questions 7 through 10. These are highlighted. They're boxed in the Manhattan Prep book, but since that's hard for me to do, I just used highlighting instead. So, you want to use the rules from this chapter to correct any errors you can find in the boxed areas. Don't change anything that's not boxed. Okay, that should be highlighted, so don't change anything that's not highlighted. The negotiations between the company, the union, and the city government. All right, so I can already see, since there's more than 2 parties, there are 3, that should be among rather than between. Were initially contentious, so they were angry at each other, they were fighting, but ultimately amicable. Well, that'd be fine. Amicable means friendly, and in the end they were, so that would make perfect sense. And eventually they were initially contentious, but yeah, that makes perfect sense. So it would have to be among. All right. So between, that's fine. Between, it's not fine. That should be among. So that would work. Ultimately, that works fine where it is, because amicable is an adjective. It describes the negotiations, and ultimately would be an adverb that modifies that adjective. All right, let's move on. Problem set, page 68 in Manhattan Prep GMAT. Jim is trying to reduce the number of soda that he drank. Okay, well, number of soda, 1, if you can quantify soda, which you could say, well, if 1 can of soda you count as a soda, you could do that, but this is the number of soda, so you'd have to say the amount of soda, because it's just it's an amount that you can't measure. It's something you need some sort of frame of reference, like an amount, 10 ounces, 12 ounces, 355 milliliters, something like that. However, his resolve to drink fewer soda was sorely tested. He found himself quaffing many of soda. Okay, his resolve to drink less soda was sorely tested, and he found himself, okay, so he was trying to, okay. I would probably just make this first thing, Jim is trying to reduce the amount of soda he drank, say the amount of soda, change that he drinks them, just make that a period. And then you could say at his, you say something like, however, he drinks, well, actually, okay, you'd have to probably just make that a semicolon. Semicolon, at last night's party, comma, however, comma, that makes sense, his resolve to drink less soda was sorely tested. And then I would change this comma either to another semicolon, or you can make it a dash. He found himself quaffing, you'd say, many, well, it'd be many of sodas, okay. Many, and I wouldn't say many of sodas, I'd say large quantities of sodas. You know, the trouble is of sodas really makes it hard. You'd say gallons of sodas or something, you know, something like that. Anyway, so let's see what we say here. Okay, so the number should be amount since it's not countable without a unit. The first comma should be a semicolon or a period. And then fewer should be less. And Okay, the second comma should be a semicolon or a dash. Both could have it. And okay, many should be followed by a unit since it's of sodas, so it would have to be gallons of it. And of sodas changed, where the of should be replaced with a number of several, but unfortunately we don't get to change that, so I would just say gallons of sodas. Does that make sense? All right, hope it does. Jim is trying to reduce the number of soda. Okay, well, I thought we just did that, but anyway. Okay, so a possible correction is Jim is trying to reduce the amount of soda that he drinks, semicolon, at last night's party. However, his resolve to drink less soda was sorely tested, so he found himself quaffing many sodas. Well, the problem with this answer that I wrote here is that's not something that is actually marked as takeoff, so you'd have to say probably gallons of sodas, or you'd be figurative oceans of sodas, whatever, something like that. So let's move on. Problem set. Page 68, Manhattan Prep, GMAT. Between 1998 and 2003, there was heavy fighting in Parthia between numerous armed factions, yet this conflict, so much complicated than a conventional war between two states, involved no less than 8 countries and 25 militias. Okay, well, the problem here is, okay, between's fine. And second, between, okay, since it's more than 2 people, they say it's numerous people, that's definitely more than 2, so it'd have to be among. So, okay. Yet is illogical because it was more complicated than a conventional war. Well, yeah, we know that because it involves more than 2 people, so, or more than 2 factions, so it'd have to be. So you would want to say complicated warfare is consistent with heavy fighting, so replace that with a comma and a conjunction such as and. You know, this is there's heavy fighting between numerous armed factions. So you could put comma, so this conflict was so much more complicated than blah 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 blah, or you know, therefore this, or because of that, you know, something like that. All right, the third between 2 states, that makes sense because they're talking about conventional war between 2 states. And less is wrong because involved, it would have to be fewer because we don't have involved. Yeah, involve fewer, so militias and countries are countable things. So definitely would have to be fewer rather than less. So one correct answer would be between 1998 and 2003, there was heavy fighting in Parthia among numerous armed factions. This conflict, so much more complicated than a conventional war between 2 states, involved no fewer than 8 countries and 25 militias. All right. And number 10. Most legislators, including much of in the governor's own party, well, there wouldn't be much, it'd be many, realized that the governor's budget would imperil the state's finances. Nevertheless, the budget is likely to be approved because few legislators want to anger voters by cutting spending or raising taxes. So it would have to be including many. All right, nonetheless, that makes perfect sense, is even though people realize, hey, this is a really stupid budget, they're still going to approve it because nobody wants to do that. So, All right. So, probably here where this comma is, after states finances, that should be a semicolon because this is a complete sentence. Most legislatures, realize. That would be one complete sentence. And then nonetheless is not a conjunction. So you would have to have a semicolon, and then this comma is fine. And it is likely to be, okay, comma followed by because makes sense. So that's what we're doing here is, okay, so the possible correction would be something like, most legislators, including many in the governor's own party, realize the governor's budget would imperil the state's finances. Nonetheless, comma, the budget is likely to be approved, comma, because few legislators want to anger voters by cutting spending or raising taxes. Okay, let's move on. Okay, number 11 through 13. So these are multiple choice questions with only one correct answer. So, okay. And basically A is just repeating the original underlined part of the sentence. So here one, okay, this is the whole sentence. On setting foot in the Gothic cathedral, the spectacular stained glass windows amazed the camera-wielding... Oh, okay. Those are not the things that set foot upon the... So it would have to be upon setting foot in the Gothic cathedral, the camera-wielding tourists were amazed by the stained glass windows. So the other one has to be correct. Okay, oh, there's two of them. Okay, B, upon setting foot in the Gothic cathedral, the camera... Okay, so that looks right. Oh, I see. So B isn't right because it talks about the spectacularly stained glass. Well, stained glass is an adjective. I wouldn't say they're spectacularly stained glass. They're not stained in a really particularly interesting way. It's that they are stained glass windows that are spectacular. So it has to be C. The camera-wielding tourists were, upon setting foot in the Gothic cathedral, so that would be right, amazed by the stained glass windows, which were spectacular. That works. Number 11, the answers. Upon setting foot in the Gothic cathedral, the spectacular stained glass windows amazed the camera-wielding tourists. All right, so we've looked at these already. We know it's not A because windows can't set foot in a cathedral. They don't have feet. Ha ha ha. And B is close, but it's not spectacular. It would have to be spectacular because we know that stained glass would be an adjective describing a kind of window. You could say that whole thing is an adjectival clause. Anyway, spectacularly stained windows could be normal windows that have been stained in a spectacular way, but that's really not what this question means. So C, the camera-wielding tourists were, upon setting foot in the Gothic cathedral, amazed by the stained glass windows, which were spectacular. This one is right, although a bit clunky, but they will do that on purpose, give you one that's clunky and doesn't sound as good as one that has a mistake that you might be able to miss, so that way you pick the wrong answer. Don't be that person. Just say, okay, this is a stupid answer, but it's the only one that's right. Or you can call it the least stupid answer. Let's move on. 12. Mount Everest, which is the tallest mountain on Earth, lies on the border between Nepal and Tibet, first summited by Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary in 1953. Well, all right, we can see the one problem is The border of Nepal and Tibet was not first summited by Norgay and Hillary. It would have to be Mount Everest, so I would want to put that next to the tallest mountain on Earth. Those should be two things that both modify Mount Everest. Okay, so it can't be A because we already saw that's a problem. B, the problem is it looks like Edmund Hillary is the tallest mountain on Earth. No, I'm pretty sure he's a guy, not a mountain, and he's definitely not the tallest anything on the Earth. And so, first summited by Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary in 1953, Mount Everest, okay, the tallest mountain on Earth, makes sense. Okay, lies between the border of Nepal and Tibet. All right, so C is the only possible right answer, and there you go. Well, it's the only one out of these three. So we can see that's correct. I've already explained why these other two are wrong, so let's move on. Right, so number 13, lucky 13. The population of San Antonio increased more than it did in the United States in 2016, adding almost 66 people per day. All right, so, well, maybe, but let's look at B. San Antonio increased more than it did in any other city, so the population increased more in San Antonio than it did in any other city in the United States, adding almost. All right, well, that sounds about right. C. San Antonio increased more than the population, so the population of San Antonio increased more than the population of any other U.S. city, almost adding. Well, okay, C, I see almost adding. That sounds like it could have been that, yeah, almost 66 people a day decided they were going to move to San Antonio, but then they had a change of heart. They got a better job offer maybe in Houston, so they decided to move to Houston instead. Ha ha ha. So C can't be right. And then the same problem here is with A. Let's look at this. A, the population of San Antonio increased more than it did in any other U.S. city. Well, the trouble is the population of San Antonio generally would only make sense if it increased in San Antonio. If the population of San Antonio increased in Houston, then they'd be moving to Houston and they would really become the population of Houston. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. Or if they did in Austin or any other city. Then B, the population of San Antonio increased more in San Antonio, or the population increased more in San Antonio than it did in any other city in the United States in 2016, adding almost. All right, adding almost 66 people per day. Oh, that makes sense because almost 66 means if you average it out, it's 65.9 or something like that. So it's almost 66 people per day. That makes perfect sense. So B is the right answer. This should help you with the basics of sentence correction. Now practice. I've covered the basics with you here. So as the old joke goes, how do I get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. Or as a samurai would say, the more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. We can arrange more meetings for in-depth review of the GMAT or other standardized test reading comprehension. We can do it through collabful groups. Please check them out to see what I have to work with you. And this is being recorded right after Christmas in 2021, definitely January of 2022. We're going to have several collabful groups. Going to be relatively cheap, I believe about $10 a head for group instruction. Or if you want to work with me one-on-one, just contact me at john@johnlindeball.com or at 415-623-4251. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and my information is on my profile and at johnlindeballtutoring.com. Hope this helped. All right, and if you like this, hey, why not subscribe to my channel? Wouldn't that be a great idea? You'd be helping me out. It's free. They have all these wonderful videos like this one that you've just watched on it. Why not subscribe? Why not share? Why not help me out? All right. Thanks. Have a good day.